navigating the camera in Vue can be a little tricky sometimes, and it takes a little getting used to. Mainly, you just have to kind of get an idea of some of the features that are enabled by default and the effects they have on the camera when you're navigating and trying to move around. If you're working through the host application running xStream, then the only camera that will show up as a Vue camera is the active camera within the scene, regardless of how many other ones are within the Vue scene. You can manage the cameras over on the right with the Camera Control Center. You can also navigate this way and move around the scene. By default, every scene will have a main camera and a top camera. So you can right-click on the text up at the top of the control center to switch between cameras, store a camera, in other words, create a duplicate of the current camera, manage the cameras, which will allow you to delete cameras. And then if you don't have the camera selected, you can go to the camera and select it this way. The arrows up the top allow you to switch between the different cameras. So if we go over to the main camera, and now we click on this disk down in the lower right, a little floppy disk icon, that will store the camera. So if we hit the back button, it'll take us to the last camera, which is camera 1, the duplicate of the main camera. So you can choose to stay in the main camera, frame different shots, and store it, and then continue moving the main camera and creating new cameras that way. Or you can store the camera, hit the back button to go to the last camera, and modify them this way. So a couple of different workflow types when working with Vue cameras. A really cool feature that is not available within Vue running in the host application is the height option. And all the cameras have a cool height feature, which can be locked as well. So if we go to the main camera and take a look at the height, whether the height lock is turned on or off, which can be done just by clicking on the little lock icon up here in the aspect tab. This would normally be the object properties within xStream, the integrated within the host. So we can define how high we want our camera above the object that's directly underneath it. If we lock the height, manipulations we make to the objects under the camera will simply move the camera. So if we scale up this terrain, what we're going to see happening is that the main camera will still remain at 3 meters above the surface, for wherever the surface is. Now if we also go into the top view and we're going to set this to global, we can move the camera and it'll also stay above the terrain. And then we can do that in our side views as well. And if you have a Space Navigator mouse or a 3D mouse, once it's locked, you can just kind of push it forward or whichever way you have the axes set up. But pulling it up would be basically the same as pushing it forward, which will just allow you to kind of climb the terrain and navigate the scene that way. It makes it really nice and a lot more immersive. And if you're using a Space Navigator mouse or 3D or 4D mouse, and you want to be able to move around the scene a little more freely, you can just turn off the height lock, and then it'll navigate like it normally would. It is difficult though when the objects are selected, because Vue does want to rotate around the pivot of the object, which isn't always your area of focus. Especially pay attention if you have the sunlight selected. Make sure you don't try to move the camera, because that can usually move the camera very far, and then you have to reset it. A few more options that can really help navigating the scenes is the ability to slow down the sensitivity or decrease the sensitivity of the camera controls. By default, this is done by holding down the control key while you are moving the camera. So it's most effective within the camera control center. So normally if we were to move in and out, you can see it's moving very quickly. Hold on control, it's going to go much smoother. So we would have a really fast movement. I'm using the scroll on my mouse, but then if I add the slow down, it allows us to move much smoother. So that can be really helpful. If you find that the camera is always moving too fast, you can go to File Options, and on the bottom of the list where the triggers are located, there is an option for move the camera back and forth slowly. If you switch those two around, so move back and forth slowly is just the mouse wheel, and then maybe, and I have my slow down set to Alt for this one. Then what you could do is create a constant slowdown, so the camera will always move slow. It won't speed up though if you hold down. In this case, if I was to put the Alt on the normal back and forth, it will not speed up, and it will always default to the slower one if you just assign the mouse wheel to that. The trigger doesn't really seem to work well for translate camera or move the camera side to side or up and down. So if you need to slow that operation down, you can go to the pan camera in the control center, hold down the control key, and it'll be much smoother, a lot easier to control. Another thing about the cameras is mine is currently showing the field of view as opposed to focal length. You can do this by going to File Options, and under Display Options, View Options, there's an option to Show Camera FOV, Field of View, and Object Properties. If I turn that off, then we're going to see the focal length. So you can pick whichever one you want to use.